Morning, guys. Thank you again for your time. Just let's have another really quick round of applause for our panellists and speakers today. That was great. Thank you, Sonia and Beau. Love those sessions. So today's topic is leadership traits of a modern changer, and I think I learned a huge amount from those keynotes. And I guess really what I took away from it is you can just keep your mind open at all times, because you never know when there's going to be an opportunity to learn. But yeah, welcome everyone to today's panel discussion. Thank you guys for sharing your experiences. And joining our panel today as well is Anathea, Ruys, who is the CEO of UM. I'm Varley, Strategy and Planning Director at Zenith and part of the MFA 5+ committee. So the questions that we're posing to the panel today are a compilation of themes from the 5+ community. And many thanks for everyone for sending in your questions. And we've bucketed them into 3 groups, as you can see on the screen there. So around behaviour, DE and I, and everyone's favourite topic, it seems to be lingering just like itself, COVID. And we're going to have a bit of time to ask questions of the floor. So have a think, and if you have a question, put your hand up, and we've also got a couple of books that have been recommended from the guys to give away if anyone wants to ask a question. So I guess let's start off with a question to all of you. Based on the fact, I just want to know one thing that you guys took away from each of the presentations today. Really succinctly, what's something new that you learnt? And Sonia, I'll ask you first.
Probably from Beau, your presentation, I feel like something you said around expect life to be difficult was a good one for me. So your picture around the ups and downs, and I feel like I always expect life to be the top one. I don't know why, but I always expect that whatever I plan, I'm going to go on some linear journey to get to the point where I've decided I want to get to. But yeah, it really resonated with me just to think about, actually, if I think about my life, it's been way more the bottom one. And I don't actually remember a time when it's been the top one. So it was a good reminder. Thanks, Beau.
Anathea?
I think that was pointed at me when you said one thing that you learnt out of this.
Sure. If you want to take it that way, that's fine.
I think, Sonia, listening to you, I was sitting there nodding along in vehement agreement with a lot of what you said. And one thing that really stood out, and I think we'll probably discuss this a bit more, was when you were talking about the difference between saying, we want to bring everyone's full and real and authentic selves to work. And I have 100% said that and felt like I've really meant it. And I loved your challenge of, are you really ready for that? In that, and you have to get yourself to the point where the environment, the social environment, the emotional environment, the physical environment is able to welcome people in everything they want to and choose to bring to work. That was another one. And then also with what you were saying, Beau, I really loved that, the comfort zone analogy. The more time you spend out of your comfort zone, the better, and that your comfort zone then gets bigger. I thought that was really beautiful.
And Beau?
Yeah, I really love the exercise shutting your eyes that Sonia did, and just those things you mentioned were what I did picture, and the just showing us that doesn't mean you're a bad person if you're picturing those, but it's just natural for us to have those negatives or those biases towards those things. So yeah,
totally. Okay, great. Let's jump into the meaty stuff. So first thing we'll talk about a little bit is behaviour. And Beau, actually, I'll throw it back to you because I think you called out a really good example of a leader in Australia, Scott Pendlebury, who's definitely someone that leads through action on the footy field. But I wanted to know, is there any leaders of change in the Australian public sphere that you look up to, that you admire, based on that, kind of change through action kind of philosophy you have?
Yeah, I suppose the one for me at the moment is the Australian of the Year, Dylan Alcott. Like the difference he is making for, particularly my community of the disability community, and for the whole of society is fantastic. And what I really love is that he's breaking down those barriers, but he's also putting himself out there to be criticised and judged as well. And at the same time, he's just going, I'm going to be me and that's all right. So like you hear people say that maybe he's a bit arrogant or he's a bit that or whatever, and I don't, like for him to put himself out there and continually just do it because that is the right thing to do, and it is breaking down barriers and making the world more inclusive and trying to help people that might not have the leg up that other people have. I really admire that.
Yeah, definitely. Dylan Alcott is a great example. Anathea, is there anyone from your perspective?
Yeah, Dylan Alcott I also really admire, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because you think about, I hadn't heard that people think he's arrogant, but he's got a lot to be arrogant about. He's an incredible sports person. He's changing the world in amazing ways, and he's Australian of the Year. So, yeah. Another person that I really admire is, for the action side of it, leadership through action, because leadership is obviously not about leading a team or a group of people that you are meant to be leading. It's about the action that you're putting out there. And I think Grace Tame is an incredible example of that. She is the epitome of action rather than words, and in a similar way to Dylan, she's got an enormous amount to be proud about, but she's constantly striving to do things differently, and she is not afraid or ashamed to put herself out there and to invite those conversations in a really brave way.
Absolutely. I think both of those people are two really key examples of leaders of that drive change. And I guess, Sonia, kind of the next question to you. So when we are leaders of change, sometimes we need to call out behaviour that might be not the most appropriate or not the best kind of behaviour. But sometimes that person might not be aware that what they're doing is actually wrong. How would you go about approaching those kind of situations to teach people to have a little bit more of an open mind?
Yeah. I find it an interesting question about calling out behaviour. And I actually think calling out behaviour isn't the right way to do it. So I think having a conversation and asking people questions back to themselves, and I mean, this is part of my job. It's part of, having to change people's assumptions, and sometimes my reaction wants to be very different to what it is, but it is about sort of questioning things. So, for example, at work, we have every year the discussion around Australia Day, Survival Day, Invasion Day, whatever you like to refer to it. I just call it January 26th. It doesn't have any more meaning than that to me. So for Jan 26, we obviously ended up making a decision that we weren't going to celebrate it, but we were going to talk to BP staff around what it actually means for a lot of Indigenous and First Nations people, and also people that possibly feel excluded as not being Australian enough in this country on Australia Day. And so those conversations when people say, I've got a right to have Australia Day, I'm an Australian and that's my right. So it's not about calling out the behaviour, it's about saying things like, that's really interesting, so tell me a little bit about what, you say you've got a right, talk a little bit about that, unpack that for me about the right to have, Australia Day and then people go into it and they often, through, I guess, that guiding, and what leaders really should be able to do is guide a conversation around, understanding their people's feelings and thoughts and not shutting it down, but also then being able to relay back to them, actually, this is why we've come to this decision as a business. So I really think it's important not to shut people down or call out behaviour, but invite people to start unpacking their assumptions around their behaviours. And my husband recently had an interesting meeting. I won't say the company, but he was meeting with two guys. They were of Indian background. My husband's obviously coloured South African. So 3 guys of dark skin having a conversation. And they said to my husband, man to man, whatever, they said, the women are taking all of our jobs in the fuel industry. And my husband's like, oh, they're taking all of the jobs. And they were like, yeah, they're taking all of the jobs. Like, there's just me and this guy and whatever. Now they're going to put a woman in as the leader, and there's us. And she's, the women are taking all of our jobs. And my husband said, it's really interesting. I'm surprised that, you know, two guys from a diverse background who came to Australia later on, and he said, myself, you know, coloured South African, he said, I used to talk exactly the same way, because but I've been with my wife for way too long and she wouldn't let me talk like that. But he's like, you guys out of everyone should understand what it's like to feel like you're not given the same opportunities just because of your race or background. And he's like, I'm surprised out of all people that you guys would come with that attitude. And they're a bit like, oh, well, they're not taking all of the jobs, but they're giving this woman this job, you know. And he didn't sort of call it out, but he unpacked and found a common point to sort of why they're coming from that point. And then they were like, you know, they sort of settled down a little bit after that. Yeah. But it is about just sort of unpacking.
And I think it's what your husband did there as well was in the moment. And I think in the moment's really important, because if you're in a meeting room or in a conversation with a group of people and somebody says something that is inappropriate or offensive, I think it's really important to address it then. Otherwise, your silence tells the person that is, or the people that are listening to that it's okay to speak in that way. So I do think that obviously you can have follow-ups, you can have private conversations with people, but it's important to be, and I was taught this phrase which I think is really nice, be an upstander, not a bystander. So be with the people who are being, who are having something said about them or something that might be offensive to them, be with them, don't just stand by and let it happen and think you'll deal with it later.
Right. Beau, you talked a lot around kind of making the people around you better, and through your experiences with coaching. I wonder if you had any advice around, you know, when someone is feeling down or out of the group, how you can get people to rally around them and make them feel included, and get them to rally towards a common goal, which for coaching would be towards a flag.
Yeah, it's a good question. Just thinking that like it's more cultural based, I think, than anything, that conversations we have. So when we come in, are we having a positive influence on the people around us? And in terms of, is the question based around like if someone is feeling excluded? Is that what you're referring to? Or
feeling excluded, or just like, you know, not having the greatest time, or not feeling as included in the team or group as you might hope they would be.
Yeah. When we come in, I suppose I've been fortunate at community level. Obviously, it's not work, but community level at football clubs to be a part of five grand finals in 5 years, and I think that's been based around enjoyment of what we do, having everyone feel valued and cared for, and also building confidence in people rather than bringing them down. So in terms of workplace, if we are just asking ourselves those questions, are we creating an environment where everyone cares for one another? And Ben Crow, I don't know if people know Ben Crow, Mojo Crow. He coaches like he mental coach for Ash Barty and other athletes, and he's always about human being before human doing. So it's who we are as people before what we do as people. And if we are as people coming in and going, how are we as people? Are we being the people we want to be before worrying about our outcomes? Then that is going to create an environment that's inclusive.
Great, thank you. I think we'll kind of move on to the next topic, and Anathea, I'll direct this one towards you. There's conversation around the importance of smaller edits and shifts that we make to our leadership styles, rather than just a huge shift straight off the bat when it comes to sort of affecting change. What's one thing that you've done and the people in the room can do to help foster a bit of a culture of, a better culture of inclusiveness and belonging within their business? I'm particularly keen to hear from a media agency kind of landscape example.
I don't think I can focus on one thing, and this is what I've done to become better. The last couple of years for me, I was living in the States up until a year ago. So I was living in LA, and the murder of George Floyd and the racial inequity that the conversations that came after that were a huge, huge period of great learning for me. And I'm the person who you were talking about when you described someone who I would have always said that I'm a really open, really diverse, really inclusive person. I foster environments like this. And I realised that I was carrying around all of these unconscious biases. I would talk about a gut reaction. Now, I've learnt now that gut reaction means someone like me. And so during that time, it was, for me, a period of lots of reading, lots of self-reflection, lots of listening to people who were gracious enough to teach me and to have conversations with me around what I was thinking and feeling and how I could change that, change some of those, or to your point, to actively understand that I am coming from a place of privilege and bias. And so for me, it's a constant evolution of thinking around, why do I feel the way I do? How can I put myself in the position of learning more about other folks and what is going to be important to those people, to people in general, and then how can I foster an environment that enables people to feel really comfortable? And I don't think there's a switch. I don't think there's a book that you can read. I don't think that there's one thing you can do to make this change. I think it has to be constant and it has to be an evolution.
Yeah, right. And Sonia, I guess that was a large part of what you were talking about. Is it better to, or from your point of view, is it better to make those small iterative changes over time rather than make a huge jump and change quite quickly?
And I think it's a bit of both. So I think you can't shy away from the huge changes either. So if you think about, for example, one good example for large change is coon cheese. Yeah, we all know what that is. We all know what the cheese is. And it's now cheer cheese, right? So one huge change that organisation did is change their name because their other name meant something very offensive to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and had been an offensive slur in this country for a long time. So to do that big thing, that one big thing, and make a stand, even though there was probably a lot of people who were like, this is political correctness, going too far, whatever, that sent a really strong message as an industry. But also, if that company only did that one thing and then never, employed Indigenous people or never employed anyone from diverse backgrounds, kept everything the same but only did that one big thing, well, that wouldn't matter either. So it's a combination of doing the big things that send strong messages in your industry because you've got that power, and then within your organisation doing all the small things that matter to help sustain that big thing. So I think it's a bit of both. So wherever there are the big changes where you can send that message to it, but you can't just rest on that. Vice versa, you can't just do all the small things and then not be accountable outwardly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sorry, back to you, Anathea, is so off the back of Sonia's keynote around bringing the theory of bringing your whole self to work, which I think is something really, you called me out on it when I met you before. Because I said, that's what I do. I bring my whole self to work. But I'm a 30-year-old, white, straight male. I have all the advantages in the world. And I've never really considered it like from that equality versus equity perspective before. So I guess to you, Anathea, is the media industry ready for that concept? Are we ready for people to bring their whole selves to work? Because, as Sonia was saying, it's a huge risk for some people. It's very different.
Yeah, I wrote some notes before this. Of course, we have to be ready. It is not an option. Of course, we must be ready. We must lead in this space. Listening to Sonia, take more notes. Because I think we have to be actively creating an environment, as I said, social, emotional, physical, where people can, and I think the biggest takeaway I took from that is people can bring as much of themselves as they want to and feel comfortable. But we need to make that environment one where people can feel safe. And I think in our industry, in the media industry, we have a great opportunity, because compared to some other industries, we're probably further down the path, or we could be further down the path. So we can be a really inclusive, safe environment. But I was just telling a little story to the folks on my table that I was moderating a panel. I was part of the LGBTQI+ business resource group in my last job. And I was moderating a panel, and there was an activist who'd been around since the 70s. And he was a bit crotchety. He'd been fighting very hard for a very long time. And we were all talking about pronouns, and it's really important to put your pronouns. And it is. It's really important to put your pronouns out there and to discuss pronouns and to normalise pronouns. And he said, if you don't have a bathroom that people can go to that they feel represents the gender that they are, then you can, I won't say what he said because it's too early in the morning for those swear words, but he said it's all just words. It doesn't mean a thing. And that was a really big wake-up call to, it's what you're saying, it's the action behind the words that is really important.
And that's that low-hanging fruit sometimes that you just go for, we'll all just put our pronouns and look at us.
Yeah.
But yeah, unless you do the meaty pieces of work that actually make a difference to the people you're representing by using the pronouns, then it falls over.
Will on my table here just said to me, what was it? Minimum commitment, maximum exposure, and that's not good. So yeah.
Yeah, that is the definition of low-hanging fruit, exactly. I'll move on to our last topic just before we open it up to the floor for a couple of questions. But I guess, Beau, to you, speaking of COVID, and you mentioned how that's kind of destroyed the last 2 footy seasons that you've tried to coach. What did you have to change as a leader to try and pull your group through that uncertain time when everything was uncertain? What were the changes that you made to your style of leadership?
COVID's been quite a challenge for a lot of people. But I suppose just about showing people that you're there and you're caring. But in terms of our group, I sort of just let our players go in terms of we weren't going to get back and play in 2020, so it was about getting away from footy and doing other things in your life, but also showing care. But I suppose over COVID, it is a challenge, but I reckon that what Sonia said before about the ups and downs and how life is like that, I think we try and steer clear of that stuff. We try and steer clear of those bottom ends, but no doubt I reckon COVID makes us more resilient and better for it going forward. So just sitting in those situations and having conversations around, all right, it's challenging for a lot of people. If you're living in an apartment on your own with no one else and you're in lockdown for that whole time, that is a challenge. It is definitely a challenge, but just sitting there and going, all right, this is a challenge, it is tough and it sucks and it's not what I want to do, but it will end eventually and I'll be better for it going forward. So
yeah, great. Sonia, during the times of change like COVID, it's very often hard to see the forest for the trees, right? We lose kind of perspective. So do you have any advice for bringing back that sense of perspective for the leaders in the room today?
Yeah, so COVID's an interesting one, especially around DE&I. And something that we're trying to be very aware of at BP is, do all of you sort of pretty much have a flexible return to work thing? So it's like come back 2 days, come back 1 day, depending on your level or whatever. Ours is come back 2 days. What I've had a chat to leaders about is keep an eye on this, because we're seeing men come back 5 days a week, and we're seeing women come back 2 days a week, and we're seeing people from different diversities come back maybe 2 days a week if they've got caring responsibilities, parents that live with them, extended family members. So we've got to keep an eye on the diversity after COVID and any return to work policy that you have, and make sure that the genders are balanced, the diversities are balanced on who's coming back. And if they're not coming back in equal sort of numbers the way they were before, representative of your population and your organisation, just be aware of it, because the people that are physically there still are the ones possibly in front of the boss, the ones for the promotion, the ones that are remembered. He's the guy that's here 5 days a week when she's only here 2. So I guess one thing around COVID to keep an eye on from a diversity lens is who's coming back, and make sure that our unconscious bias isn't playing into those people being more committed to their roles than those who can't quite come back at the same pace.
Yeah. Before we throw it open, Anathea, how do you feel? I mean, I feel like the media agency's done it about 5 times now. Yeah. The media world, sorry. How do you feel the return to work is kind of going, and how has it been leading through that struggling period?
That's a really interesting point. Someone take that note for me, please. That's not something that I had really considered, but because we do want people to come back to the office, because that is a big part of what we all do. Is we do it together and we do it in collaboration, and we like the cultural benefits of it. But I think one of the big things that we've all had to learn during COVID is that the workplace is a really blunt instrument that was built for a certain type of person. And you know what? It suits me. I want to be in the office 5 days a week because I love it. And so therefore I've had to really rethink what working in an office means and what an office is there to do. So I think that we need to soften those edges, and we need to recognise that these blunt instruments aren't good for all people, and really open up the way we consider that. But I do think that that's a really interesting point around making sure that we are watching who comes back and how and what they're using those spaces for. But I do hope we get, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm having an absolute blast being in a room with hundreds of people. This is the stuff that we've missed. And so I don't want us to lose the opportunity to bring some of this back to our environment.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Let's throw it open to the floor. Does anyone have a question for the panel? If anyone, you were definitely first. Hands up there. If you want to, I think a microphone's headed your way. Just so everyone can hear. If you just want to say your name and who your question's directed at.
Hi, good morning. I'm Yaron Farizon from MediaCom. It's a bit anxious to ask, but I will do it anyway. So here it goes. I'm new to Australia, 9 months. It's been, a steep curve. And I guess it's a question to 3 of you. A lot of times we talk about diversity. And what I've seen, that the intentions are there, but actually not all of people experience diverse circumstances in their life. So usually it's much easier to kind of walk the way when you've been in circumstances where you were exposed to different people and different cultures and such and stuff like that. But what do you do if you have the intention, but you don't have practical experience of what diversity means, feels, or takes? And this is a situation a lot that I see here as well. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Lead.
I just think it's the way we think about it. So I think, yes, there's some people that have had an easier life than others and may have not experienced different cultures or diversities or challenges the way some other people have, definitely, and that's part of privilege. But I think if we think about people as people first and how we feel in different situations, and we use empathy to guide the way we understand the world. So, who of you can remember at primary school not being invited to play with a group of friends that you wanted to play with, and what it felt like to be excluded, even if it was just for that one day, or your friend didn't turn up so you had no one to play with and you walked around lonely for 5 minutes just feeling terrible and excluded. It doesn't have to be huge life experiences that help you to understand empathy and what it's like to be excluded or not included. If you turn on the TV and you don't see yourself represented anywhere, or in the paper the only time you see yourself represented is in a negative story, they're all little micro experiences that you're having that's creating the way you respond to people. So if you can tap into all the micro experiences you have, that will help you develop a sense of empathy. And if you sort of lead with a sense of empathy around, you know, anything you can relate to where you felt excluded, where you felt like you haven't fit in, where you felt like you haven't been heard or seen, I think that can always then help you to ask the questions you need to ask of other people who have had more diverse experiences in their life and build on that. It doesn't mean you can't understand. It means that you are on a journey of understanding, and you have to start with what you know, which is maybe a few little different pieces, and use that to build and ask questions and expand your understanding, I guess. It's about asking the questions and being open and willing to say, this is my starting point. I need to learn from other people around me about what this feels like, what this looks like.
And we all need to do the work. We all need to do the reading. We all need to follow different Instagram pages to open ourselves up to reading different voices and hearing different voices. And I think that that's something that was a big sort of awakening for me, was that I read and listened to and followed some people that were very reflective of me. And by opening that up, I've become exposed to fantastic conversations. Dylan Alcott's podcast, which is called Listenable, is remarkable. It's just it's opened up my knowledge so much. So I think we have to do the work.
Yeah. Right. Okay, let's have one more question. One more question. Anybody else got a question for the panel over there, just in the back?
Yeah, sure. It's Daniel King from Meta. Sonia, right at the start of your speech, I thought, what an incredibly challenging business you're in, firstly, job that you're in, and then I thought about region as well. Like, what a diverse region you have. I was really interested to know if there were any specific barriers, or could you talk about any specific barriers in regards to some of the countries that you've dealt with and their political systems, and how those political systems can potentially suppress culture. And I'm not being specific about which countries, any that you've experienced.
Yeah. Have you got all day?
No, we don't.
No. Look, it's definitely a huge challenge, and I think the only way that I've been able to be successful in this role is really knowing my countries and sort of taking them as individual cultures and countries. And we don't want to put people at risk. And so this is about bringing your whole self to work as much as you want and as much as you feel safe doing. So yes, there are countries where it's illegal to be openly gay. In some of the countries where BP has an LGBTQI+ agenda, Pride. And so in those countries, it's not an excuse for us to drop the agenda and say, oh, well, it's legal for some countries, so therefore we just won't talk about it. It won't be part of our DE&I. But what we do is we focus on safe space at work. So we are very careful around sort of, this is a safe space. We've turned our stairwell in one of our countries where it's still very topical to be gay into a rainbow staircase. We're not saying anything about why it's a rainbow staircase overtly, but we all know why it's a rainbow staircase. So we're doing messages and things, and we've got a poster up saying, whoever you are, it's okay to be yourself at work. It's a safe place to be yourself at work. So we're not saying, Pride, LGBT, but we're still doing the work in those countries. We just have to be very sensitive and very careful and understand that people could be prosecuted for bringing their true self to work. And so it is about then coaching leaders on the delicate balance of what it looks like and not giving them excuse to opt out either, because it would be very easy for the leaders in some of those countries across ASPAC to just say, well, I'm out because it's not legal. And so, yeah, I mean, we still also have gender, in some countries as well, where gender is still an issue, and there's the attitude of women not being qualified enough and just taking jobs because they just rolled out of bed and walked into the job. It's very challenging, but it's about taking each country and the nuances and respecting the cultures in each country too, not just coming in with a Western view and saying, well, we're doing D&I and you all have to deal with it. it's being, respectful to that culture and country as well as we go. So a very individual approach for all of ASPAC, really. But yeah, not easy. I wake up most days going, how am I going to do this? Yeah, not easy, but it's an individual approach and it has to be tailored, yeah.
All right, in an effort to wrap things up, I think we could chat all day, and otherwise I'm going to get in trouble from Linda in the back there. I'd just love to hear from you, each of you, just one thing that kind of every leader in the room can take away from here today, and just any advice that you'd like to give. And Beau, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, one thing I think is putting yourself in other people's shoes. So, yeah, Adam Goods, footballer being booed by 90,000 white people on the field. Someone with a disability coming into work, and like even myself, come up here from Philippine yesterday. I do have this tool I can use to get a button-up shirt on, but my 1.5-year-old broke that. So I've come here late and I'm like, I got told that, it was pretty formal, like reasonably formal event, and I'm here with a t-shirt on and stuff like that. Like just little things, being a woman and going into work that's filled with men or what, just putting ourselves into other people's shoes and becoming more aware, and that can, I think that's the number one thing in terms of diversity, inclusion, and just being aware of other people's circumstances and not feeling pity, feeling empathy, and how can we best support that?
Anathea?
I think putting yourself in other shoes is exactly right. So let's all commit to do the work. Go out and follow 5 to 10 different people on Instagram or Twitter or wherever, and listen to their voices and hear what they've got to say, and think about how that applies to you and the world you live in. It's not that hard either.
Yeah, that's so easy to do. Love that. Sonia?
So my things would be, just remember that you all have bias. You've got to be aware of them. You've got to challenge them every day. There's no such thing as the system. You are the system. All of you make it what it is. And yeah, I just want people to go away and realise that every action, every word, everything they do as an individual makes the difference. And one more thing is, if you're sitting, the next time you're sitting in your office, your boardroom, your, LT, your leaders forum, anything like that at your level, if you look around and you see most people looking like you, you've got work to do.
Great, thank you. Thanks everybody. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for your expertise and wisdom. But yeah, just another round of applause for our panellists today. Thank you so much.